But that also is not enough. We eventually need the governments to provide policy frameworks, systems, structures, resources, and infrastructure to make sure that everything that we have to do is workable and that there is peace, order, justice, and equity for all that we endeavor to do to be sustainable. But the three are not enough in the absence of private sector who are quite key at bringing innovation, entrepreneurship, as well as capacity to finance and support the change we want. So as you see, collaboration is quite important because through that we can create a pool of resources, ideas, experiences, as well as tried and tested approaches of doing development in addressing challenges of humanity in the most effective way. Ladies and gentlemen, to achieve meaningful transformation, we must embrace best practices. These are basically tried and tested approaches of doing things that has been proved over time in various places and contexts that it can actually work. Engaging best practices gives us opportunity to avoid the folly of trying and wasting resources at doing what has already been done elsewhere. Or in simple language, best practices allows us to leapfrog what we do instead of walking like a millipede covering every single inch. It's by this learning that as we gather several experiences, both past and present, from different parts of the world and of the practices, we can adopt such practices in a unique circumstances and bring them together to accelerate change. Best practices provide us with valuable insight and save us time and opportunity so that we focus on what works and we avoid those things that may not be working. So by studying successful models of development that has worked elsewhere, we can identify strategies and policies that can help us come up with interventions that are most workable and put the little resources that are normally limited to the most best optimal way that can bring out difference. We can actually do more with less. It is in embracing these best practices that will ensure that our efforts are evidence-based and are efficient and effective and can make a difference as we continue in the development trajectory. Ladies and gentlemen, in the course of the day, we'll be discussing the role that young people play in the philanthropy landscape. We know Africa is young. East Africa in particular, or Sub-Saharan Africa, is very, very young, and time will not allow me to crack the numbers on how many are they, where are they, and all that. But we know that the future of the continent and the future of development really lies in the shoulders of young men and women. Their energy, creativity, determination, as well as zest and zeal gives us a huge potential to shape the trajectory of the future development. It is essential that as we empower them and engage them in doing development, they are actually leading the agenda in transformation, and they are discussing and being engaged right at the center of development. It is for them, and we have to do it with them, not for them only. We must provide young people with quality education, skills, training, mentorship, capacity, as well as opportunities, so that by investing in them, they can be more empowered and more aggressive and active in participating in shaping their own futures, but also in joining the great work that we are already doing in the philanthropy space. The young brings fresh perspective to things. They are bold, they are restless, they are daring, they have innovative ideas, and they have deep understanding of the challenges they face. It is by involving them that the decisions we make for development and for the resource allocation and stewardship will make most sense. Let us give them voice, as we know that they are able and they can actually do that which we think we can do for them. Ladies and gentlemen, development can only be meaningful if it is equitable and inclusive. The whole agenda of diversity, disability, and inclusion is quite at the center of every single step that we do in philanthropy. We must strive to create a society where everyone has equal opportunity in accessing resources, but also in sharing in the benefits associated with the same, as well as undertaking responsibilities that is also associated with the same. This means removing barriers, both clear and opaque, as well as all impediments and obstacles that are based on gender, age, ethnicity, socioeconomic situations, different abilities, as well as many other aspects that divide us, including some of the recent emerging issues around disease and the related aspects that are striking mankind and dividing us into different categories. It is required, therefore, that we should address these systematic inequalities and challenges so that we live in a non-discriminatory world where all practices are inclusive and are ensuring that the marginalized have a seat on the table as we divide the cake of development. It is only by embracing this that we should be able to celebrate and bring diversity on top of the agenda that we do. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to reflect what you already know of the unique role that some of us, or some of you, who are fairly endowed with high net worth, and this I mean colleagues, fellows, friends, partners who are high net worth individuals. These individuals, however few they are, have a unique opportunity and role to play in the planet Earth. Their wealth affords them opportunity and responsibility to champion in their communities different aspects of development that require resources. By mobilizing their resources and influence and networks, we can make a substantial impact. We need to encourage and inspire high net worth individuals to actively be involved in philanthropy, as well as to invest in social good causes. They can serve as a catalyst for change by providing fundable support, as well as supporting innovative approaches, including the social enterprises that may not be supported by the traditional development cause. There is a huge satisfaction when high net worth individuals put their efforts together, and at the end of the day it transforms into or translates into something which is meaningful and which is walking masses out of poverty. It is by leveraging these capacities that we will be able to bridge the financial gap in the philanthropy world that is currently facing us. Specifically, African high net worth individuals has a role to play because they were born, they have lived, and they're experiencing issues of poverty and inequity in the first hand. We have already seen what is happening in Africa through the matchless efforts of the high net worth individuals in the continent. Interventions in our inner cities, in Kibera, in Nairobi, in Makoko, in Lagos, and many other similar places are almost solely supported by individuals who are high net worth. Much of this is normally not quantified or counted, but if you go down to the grassroots and you see what's happening in there, their efforts is making a huge difference. We cannot afford to ignore this. How then do we as practitioners encourage, support, and identify opportunities as well as innovations that are associated with this so that we bring them at the center of development? A recent study by the UN, UNDESA, in Zimbabwe in 2019 has just quantified how beautifully networked individuals in Zimbabwe were able to work together with the local chiefs to support some of the highly challenging social issues when the economy was falling apart. Schools, potable water, hospitals, as well as other social safety and security mechanisms were provided by these individuals, and it really saved lives and made a huge difference. We know and we believe that as we seek to find more support through high net worth individuals, we can do a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to belabor you with a lot of details on this. I know we have a prime day before us, and a panel is going to sit here just shortly, and we are all looking forward to discuss these issues and put them across. I would therefore like to wish you the very best in the deliberations as we put our thoughts together and as we come up with the practical and actionable steps that can scale up the third sector's intervention in impact in the development world as we embrace philanthropy. Thank you so very much. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for that encouraging start to our day. I've taken away, we are frogs and not millipedes. We're going to leapfrog into a new future that we're going to forge together. And our next panel is going to actually tell us how we're going to continue to forge a path to impact when it comes to knowledge networks, when it comes to collaboration, advocacy, innovation, and social entrepreneurship. But before we go there, I do want to say a special thank you as we're thinking about leapfrogging, because there's certain institutions which have helped us as the EAPN community to leapfrog into the future that we're actually moving towards. A special thank you to the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, which is a prime supporter of this conference, enabling so many people from across the world and across the continent to gather together. They are also supported by the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the Conrad Hilton Foundation. Can we say thank you? Thank you to those who are enabling us to jump into the future that we want. And now, I would like to invite Rosemary Amandi from ANDI, the Aspen Network for Development Entrepreneurs, who is the moderator for our next panel. And I can assure you, this is going to be an interesting one, because I know some of the people on this panel, and they are not here to mince their words, let us put it that way. So, forging a path forward, dynamic philanthropy. Over to you, Rosemary.
Thank you so much. A big hand to her. She's been doing a great job, hasn't she? Thank you. So without much further ado, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. Great. Without much further ado, I'd like to invite to the stage. We're very privileged today to have an awesome group of change makers, practitioners with us. So I'd like to invite them to join me on stage. This morning, we are going to hear from Lulu Wanakilala, who's the CEO for Legal Services Facility Tanzania. Welcome, Lulu. We also have with us Professor Becky Moyo, who's the Director of the Center on African Philanthropy and Social Investment. Welcome, Prof. Have a seat. And last but definitely not least, we have Philip Figo, who is the Executive Director for Africa Thunderbird School for Global Management.
Good morning. Okay, thank you. My name is Begi Moyo. I was looking around yesterday, just trying to check who do I know here, and I realized that I don't know most people here, and that was an indication that I must now retire. Because honestly speaking, some of us have been in these conversations for quite some time. That if you wanted to write the history of these networks, we would be able to just do it like that. And that's an indication that we are no longer adding any value. And so I hope whatever I'm going to say today is going to be of use to those that recently joined the space or where there's been distortions in the history of information. So I serve as the director of the Center on African Philanthropy and Social Investment at the University Business School. And the center is really a product of the journey that started when the Africa Grantmakers Network, which is the African Philanthropy Network now, was formed in Accra in 2009. If you look at the document that was produced then, there were about 3 issues that we were interested in. One was we need a platform where we could all go together for peer learning, sharing of lessons around the different things that we are doing as African institutions. The second was the need to celebrate and promote philanthropy. And so you notice that almost in each and every conference, we started introducing awards to actually recognize people who are doing great work in the field. And then the third was we were worried that most of the reports and writings that were produced were not peer reviewed, and so they were easily dismissed. And the idea was to set up a chair on philanthropy that would actually stand the scrutiny of time, but also the test of time in terms of the reports that are produced. And so the foundations that get gathered in Accra then agreed that we would have this gradual introduction of these different initiatives. And so the chair became one of those. So it's not an institution that was established by the university. It's an institution that was established by foundations in a university. And that is important because it helps us to realize that we actually own the Center on Philanthropy and Social Investment as a sector, because it was designed to actually produce data and knowledge for institutions that work in this particular field. What did I take away yesterday? I must be very honest, because some of you have noticed I'm because of my this museum approach that I've been given. I turned 50 this year, by the way. And then I received a book, and the book said to me, this guy these days must be treated as a museum in philanthropy circles. So I actually spend a lot of time talking to individuals. And as you've noticed, we are running a podcast out there. We really want to document what everyone is actually doing. So what stood out for me yesterday are things that happened in the plenary, but I want to tell you something that happened in the conversation I had with Evans. So Evans says, I'm asking him, why are you growing so big as EAPN? The growth is visible to everyone. And one of the things that he said was, there was a time when they were struggling. And they had to go to the membership and say, we are broke. And it was that humility that was the turning point for this network. And for me, that was a big takeaway, that at times we just have to be vulnerable in order to come up strong. Thank you.
Good morning. I don't know how I'm going to follow up with that. I'm Lulu. I'm from Tanzania. I work for an organization called the Legal Services Facility. It is called a facility because it was set up as a basket fund about 12 years ago. And the purpose of the facility is to support communities, individuals, with what we call access to justice. And access to justice is basically looking at every aspect of rights and entitlement and things that people should be able to easily access. We focus, we work with vulnerable, marginalized communities, but in particular women and girls. We support over 200 organizations across Tanzania, mainland and Zanzibar. We're present in all the regions and all the districts. We also work with a cadre of about 4,000 paralegals. We also chair the Eastern Horn of Africa Paralegal Network, which is a network of about 9 countries in East Africa. A member of the EAPN as well, cohort with Evans. We've worked with Evans for many years now, and it has been very good. We're very happy to have everyone here in our home, Zanzibar, as we say in Tanzania, karibuni sana. What I took from yesterday is, I guess being Tanzania and being also partly from Zanzibar, the history that I didn't know, which was how Zanzibar was at one point, and being a lawyer as well, that it was the legal framework was multinational, and cases were taken to India and stuff like that. So there were things that were very interesting even for me to learn. Thank you.
Thank you, Lulu.
Anna?
Thank you so much. Good morning. Philip Pigo, Executive Director of the Philanthropy School, Africa Regional Setup. Like Becky, and I think we met last year and we'll have this conversation, is that the Philanthropy School is a very old school from the US, built out of the Second World War. They're the ones who carried out the Marshall Plan in Europe, and the idea was that borders regulated by trade seldom need soldiers. It was deliberate that you can't hear? I'm trying to shout. Better? Better? Thank you. Okay. So Philip Pigo, Executive Director of the Thunderbird School Regional Center based out of Nairobi. We are an American school, but in the interest of disruption, when I was hired, I decided to move the center to Nairobi. The school was founded in the Second World War by American pilots, basically thinking through how to rebuild Europe. And so we're in the moment of a Marshall Plan, in my view, especially when the school is a global leader on innovation, but also on technology. And so where technology is much needed, actually, I think, is in this continent. I'm the founding director, done it for 5 years. I was telling Becky I'm retiring next year to do something. But I think what we've been able to do is democratize technology and democratize technology knowledge. And so it's very important, I think, in this day and age to figure out that the future, and as we've seen it right now, that if you're not able to have some fluency, and not necessarily the technical aspects of it, then I think you'll struggle. And it would be unfair for Africa once again to have missed all the 3 other revolutions and not to be a part of this, but also have a voice in this revolution. And so when you talk about philanthropy in terms of giving resources, I think philanthropy in terms of knowledge of technology and also technological tools. The other pieces that we've been able to do is sort of have some accountability to big tech companies to be able to give off their skills and capacity and capabilities. And so we continue to do that, and hopefully a lot of those in philanthropy will also leverage on those assets, because you know how to give, we know how to get from them. I hope there'll be a relationship with you. What I take from yesterday, and I think I mentioned it when you asked us to have a conversation with our neighbor, is one, I think there's a different sense of urgency. I didn't see that before. And so there's an urgency in terms of how do we ensure that we keep up to speed with how things are changing, but also how we remain relevant to enable communities to build on their own. I think that's something I saw yesterday. The other thing that I think I picked up from yesterday is beyond the urgency is the focus. Because you can be urgent and you're not focused. I saw some very focused individuals, and honestly, I'll tell you, even I think we're having this discussion, it's at a very top level. In the previous conversations, you've been sending people here. The CEOs have been sending people. You are here on your own, so I think there's something here.
Thank you very much. So I think I'd like to start with you, Lulu. And the reason, well, obvious. You're used to me. But I want you to now engage, I think, sitting as, 1A. You talked very well about the conversation on EAP and how it has grown. But I'd like you to engage around some of the strategic approaches, innovative and strategic approaches to grant making that, as grant makers, but also grantees can take in terms of responding to the dynamic needs of communities. And I think also your background in legal services, access to justice is also very interesting to this conversation from that context, because then you're seeing things from right at the top when some of us are seeing things from one side or the other. So I'd like you to engage a little bit on, what are some of the approaches, innovative approaches that we can take in terms of grant making that you're seeing, and what shift needs to happen, even as we're thinking from yesterday in terms of systems change. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think I wouldn't say, well, you can call it innovation because maybe these are things that we don't think about or we don't often focus on when we think about philanthropy. But they have been there in funding and when we talk about donor funding, multilateral funding, bilateral funding, there are certain strategic kind of things that have been done for years that maybe because we're thinking about giving, we probably don't think that, not that we don't think about it, but I think we focus more on the giving itself, especially since we're talking about philanthropy as something that we really want to take on in the continent, in Africa. We're thinking that we want to change our mindsets and really think about, instead of waiting for the funds to come from elsewhere, we cultivate that within ourselves, within our communities. So the first thing I would say is that, because you asked me strategically, we have to be strategic, first of all, in terms of, now, if we're going to think about philanthropy, then we should always remember that it has to be something that has to directly match with our mission, vision, and values as well. And it would be directed in terms of looking at a specific agenda or focus area. So you cannot talk about philanthropy and say, because it's philanthropy, we'll just get money and just support every little thing. Let's think about how do we make it more focused. How do we ensure, and I'll give an example. If an organization, like you said, access to justice, we focus on access to justice. So we know exactly what it is in terms of access to justice we want to achieve. We support other local community-based organizations, but we also ensure that the mission and vision goes hand in hand with our strategic alignment in terms of what it is we want to achieve. So I think it's important to think about that as we are planning our intervention. What is the issue that we want to address? What is the challenge that we're thinking about within our communities? So like any other program, you can do a needs assessment. Don't, I've raised funds, now I'm taking the funds to the community. Now I want to support this community because what are the funds going to be used for? And is what you're thinking exactly the same as what the community needs? Is what you're planning what the community actually wants during that time? So I was talking to a friend yesterday who said to me, gave me a very good example and said, you know, you find women in the community doing hand washing and you give them a washing machine. Do they want washing machine? Is that what they need? They might need something different. They might like washing clothes with their hands. A lot of people know this. So they might like it because maybe it's a way of community gathering, but they might need something totally different. So strategically thinking and using the same tools we've been using for a long time to do the needs assessment, to focus on what the community actually needs. It's important to also build the capacity of the people, the organizations that we work with. We know that we work with very grassroots community-based organizations, but you're not going to give funding and then expect to have all your ducks in a row if you're not going to provide a structure that will also build capacity. And will build capacity in terms of, in all aspects, and making sure that they themselves are strong organizations that are sustainable. So it's not that they only exist because they're receiving funding. They're able to generate their own income. They're able to source funding themselves. They're able to run the organizations very well. And they're also able to implement the activities that they're set out to implement. But also, I think philanthropy has to be collaborative. You cannot do it on your own. So bring together partners, like-minded organizations that are doing the work. So I mentioned what we do with the LSF and the regional network. This is a network. It's very important for us to have that because we share experiences. We share best practices. But we also find a space where we can talk about what it is we're doing within the region, and maybe even beyond that. So we also work with SADC as well, countries in the same way. And the main aim for this is, just like in this conference, is so that we're able to understand what others are doing. We're also able to learn from others. But we also have a space where we can all, like-minded people, sit together and talk about, what we're doing. And collaboration does not just end there. Collaboration with also the communities that we work with. Engagement, bringing them in, and not just doing things for the community, but bringing the community in. Engaging them fully from the beginning to the end of the process. Engaging the policymakers. It's very important because you can't work in isolation. So how are they engaged? I was again speaking to someone this morning who was saying that, it's really important to think about, I think in the conversation we were having, to think about, in some countries now we're thinking, how can we get policymakers to recognize philanthropy as, as a formal kind of sector. So that is important. But if they engage from the beginning, they will then want to, to support the initiative. So you're not being pushed to the side as this group of people doing this thing. No, this is something that we need as a country. We know what benefits there are to doing philanthropy. We know what it brings to development, to national development, to regional development, to development in general. So why not engage all the key decision makers in what we do? And then lastly, impact. It is important that we also focus on the impact and the results, and really be able to showcase what the impact is, what the results are, and be able to really, document. And I think the documentation, somebody else spoke to this, is sometimes missing. I think Sokile was talking about it. There is a lot that we do. There's a lot that is being done. And if it's not properly documented, it is very hard to speak for philanthropy as, viable, something that can bring about change in our society. And finally, we talked about systemic transformation. Everything we do has to be systemic in terms of having the right, proper structures, just like in anything else that we do. I'll stop there.
So I just want to pick up from there and bring you in, Prof. We've been hearing about collaboration, partnership. Lulu has talked about it in terms of the importance of engaging the different stakeholders, the policymakers, the community itself. Sometimes, often, the community is not at the table when the big decisions are being made, yet we are driving programs for the community, on behalf of the community, and this idea of the community's voice being represented. So there's been so much rhetoric, and I mean generally, not just in the forum that we are in this conference, about the importance of collaboration and partnership. But I think for me the question is, how do you actually make it happen? I think Lulu gave some examples in terms of the different roles of the different stakeholders and the importance of engaging them. So how do we move away from the rhetoric? Year on year, we talk about collaboration, partnership, but also wearing your mzee hat. I think you can't run away from it. You must just embrace it. What are some of the examples of partnerships and collaborations that you've seen work, that you can speak to? Because I think sometimes examples and lessons, I think, kind of make us resonate more with us. Thanks.
Hi. Okay, thank you so much. So, yeah, I'd actually planned to try and use examples that some of you might be familiar with, but also to remind us of the journey that we have traveled as a sector. And I think to do so, we need to, I'm going to focus on collaborations, but collaborations also include some aspects of innovation, because you innovate with what you already have. It's important. So wherever you are sitting, you can innovate. The extent to which you innovate effectively or expansively, I think is what we can debate, but any person sitting here has the ability and the potential to innovate. And I think if we look at the philanthropic ecosystem and some of the platforms that have come into being, there are historical moments that I think help us to understand the extent to which we have collaborated effectively or we have failed to collaborate. Because actually we should take failure as an important ingredient of success. And so the fact that we have failed in collaborating does not in itself lend us to not trying to collaborate. In fact, it should give us insight into how we should collaborate effectively. So I want to use some historical moments in the development and establishment of some of these various platforms. So for me, both innovation and collaboration require some of the following, whether you call them principles or vectors, but the first one for me is clear visionary leadership. Let me give an example. And sacrifice, clear visionary leadership and sacrifice. Let me give an example, and I don't know if I'm going to embarrass some colleagues here. I don't know if Kumi is here already. So some years back, there was a crisis in Zimbabwe. Kumi Naidu and Nomboniso Gasa from South Africa decided to be in solidarity with Zimbabweans. They went all the way to the US and led a campaign, and they went on a hunger strike. And that hunger strike led into the formation of what was called the Zima Alliance. And BRICS is here. BRICS used to be based in the US. He's somewhere there, I see him waving. He used to be based in the US working for another organization, and he teamed up with Kumi and Co. to just work out this thing around Zima Alliance. What was the problem in Zimbabwe that they wanted to solve? And they wanted a mobilization of civil society formation. But to do so, somebody had to really show leadership, and hunger strike by Kumi and Nomboniso was one way of doing that. And then the donors that were readily available, like your Wallace Global Fund and others were ready to support. And then they approached Trust Africa and said to Trust Africa, there is this program that we want to implement in Zimbabwe. How can we work with you? And BRICS was brought now to Trust Africa to run Zim Alliance, not to be a program director at Trust Africa. He is a program director, but that's not what he was. He came in to lead a specific project which had been established as a result of a problem and clear visionary leadership by the people who were involved. And then donors got involved. And then the idea was now to start a programming event, or rather a programming process in Zimbabwe with all the civil society formations there. Various formations that were brought together to work together to deal with the current crisis that was happening there. And the outcome is the current constitution of Zimbabwe. It was written out of that process by colleagues, a number of them. One of them is a late friend called Alex Makaisa, who was involved in that formation. So that's one example. Of course, there were challenges in putting this together, but there were also opportunities. Some people and some groups actually fell through in the process as we going by. We always joke with BRICS that one of the things that we think we did very badly was a grant that we gave to an institution that came to us and said they have a building and they want to use the building as an NGO center. We gave that grant and that building never materialized. Till today, we always go back to that example and say, what happened here? And some guy showed us, he said, we went there to look at the building. He says, what have you done? He says, no, the innovations and renovations are underground. And so we left it like that, because if they're underground, what can we do? So we left it like that. So that's one example, right? The second example is I think you also need to have a common challenge and common interest if you want to really collaborate and innovate effectively. And this is where I think it's important for us to talk about this current setup of people who are here, because we are all connected in one form or the other. So several years back, when a lot of institutions were coming up, your African Women's Fund, your KCTF, Trust Africa, and others, there was this concern that every time you are invited in international conferences, you are sidelined, or you are invited to speak on issues that are indigenous. Others are speaking about strategic, modern philanthropy, but you are invited as an African, you must talk to us about indigenous philanthropy. In fact, Evans was saying to me yesterday that when he was being interviewed for this position, somebody said to him, what is horizontal philanthropy? Anyway, so there was this challenge that, you always felt you did not belong. And so the issue was, how then do we create a platform where we all can belong? And so this is the history of the formation of the African Grantmakers Network, where individuals from different institutions would meet overseas and just lament about their situation. And they decided we need something that belongs to us, something that would also utilize for peer learning, but also for setting the agenda for philanthropy in the continent. So 25 organizations or foundations gathered in Accra to actually establish AGN. And this was 2009. 2010, if I'm not mistaken, we came here to Zanzibar to write the first strategy of APN. And part of the innovation then was none of us in that group were lawyers. And we wanted to have a constitution. And we realized we don't have anyone among us who can write this thing. So what do? We looked for another character. He's here, Brian Kakor. He's there. So we looked for him and said, this guy is a renowned lawyer, very dramatic in his own right. So let's bring him in. And he helped us with the first rules of association or constitution, and then the strategy. Over time, he has written a lot on regulation of philanthropy, but he was never trained in philanthropy. That's innovation. Getting a lawyer, constitutional lawyer who has nothing to do with philanthropy, and immersing him in philanthropy and making him an expert in philanthropy. And that, for me, is innovation. But what am I saying about this thing is that the need for peer learning brought these institutions together, and they were all in agreement that we needed this formation. But in this formation, we have to identify what are the different things that we are interested in. So the issues of membership, etc., etc. And one of them had to do with high net worth individuals. And I need to say this because we might assume that collaborations are always straightforward and nice. So there was a pillar that was to focus on high net worth individuals. And among us, there was a group, the Tony Elumelu Foundation, that was one of the high net worth individuals in the APN structures. And we said, you are a high net worth individual, or your founder is a high net worth individual. Please help us convene these high net worth individuals. It never happened. Because the high net worth individuals felt that if they met and sat with us, we would be asking for money. So it never happened. At the same time, the Global Fund, the Global Philanthropy Forum, was actually opening chapters all over the world, and Africa happened to be one of them. And that's how the African Philanthropy Forum emerges. So the Tony Elumelu Foundation and others became the focal point for the formation of the African Philanthropy Forum. You can imagine that at that point, in this collaborative framework, there's bound to be tension. There's bound to be tension. In fact, tensions flew very high between some of us in that instance. At one point, there was a report that was almost replicated. The size in the field was almost replicated in some event, and there was a big fight in the corridors of Addis around that report. I'm telling you this because right now all these institutions are working very well closely under the Africa Philanthropy Conference, because we've had to work hard again to find each other. So collaborations at times have to go through a moment of trial and tribulation in order for you to find each other. You can never work together unless you have known each other very well. So it's important to know each other very well. It's easy for people to say, let's form a consortia, let's get together, let's work together. But the moment you get to know each other is when the collaboration actually works. So the story of APN, APA, and others is a story that I think we need to look into, review, study, because it gives us some insight into how we have traveled from 2009 to today. I was telling Evans that East Africa Philanthropy Network and the Africa Philanthropy Network had to go through a moment where they had to constantly question themselves and their relevance. And that's part of innovation. You have to constantly question yourself and your relevance. So at some point, both of them had to rebrand from Africa Grantmakers Network to Africa Philanthropy Network, from the East Africa Association of Grantmakers to East Africa Philanthropy Network, simply because they realized that the name itself was very much limiting. It wasn't allowing them to include more groups in. And this is the situation then where the idea was EAPN and other structures in the various regions are now building blocks to APN. What does that mean? It means that the child now is older than the parent. In the case of Evans. So Evans, EAPN, is older than APN, but they are a building block to APN. And that's the humility of somebody who is older, assuming it to now be younger in the process. So there are many of these things that I can speak to. I'll come back to some of them, but I wanted to raise those issues first in terms of collaborations and innovations, using some examples of institutions that we are familiar with.
I think that's really wonderful that you're taking the illustrations that you make and you're taking it from the history of the network and kind of just, I think what also stands out for me is that some of the collaborations that have worked so well have gone through moments of trials and tribulation, but it is how you come out of that and forge ahead. I think that's important. So, Hugo, let me come back to you. Because, so I think picking up from Lulu and also just from Prof, the examples he gives about collaboration, and I think he tagged innovation, because I was going to now come to you as the wisdom around innovation. But picking up from there, I think yesterday in one of the sessions, one of the breakout sessions, you talked about this idea that we're living in a rapidly changing society. Things are changing so fast that we kind of need to be, and you also mentioned the issue around urgency, the urgency of now, given the challenges that we are facing. So I think I'd like you to engage us on how we can leverage data, technology, when we're thinking about these problems, whether we're thinking from the grant-making perspective or from the grantee perspective, how we're engaging stakeholders, how does data and technology, and also I think just kind of rounding it out around the conversation on innovation, and what role that plays, and how we can be more effective in how we engage technology and data. Make it make sense.
Thank you so much. Let me go 20 years ago. Becky and Brad. I was somewhere in Tunis, trying to do my thing, trying to help the Arab world and Europeans. Then these two fellas came and said, "What are you doing here?" And that's my first point. That between Brad and Becky, they gave a couple of us an untied grant of about $20,000 and say, "Go do you." That's how I ended up in Africa. So again, that's my first point as part of this. So that was a strategic and deliberate grant to ensure that about 10 grantees who had very specific skills and capabilities were brought back into the continent. And so that's how some of us built our work out of that. So I think for me, it was a very practical experience, but also deliberate choice by a grant maker or a network of grant makers that actually had to make that investment because they saw technology as something that needs to come back very quickly in the continent. So I think for me, when I look back, I see that was a turning point. But you see, had to take that decision. And I know they probably took a lot of risks at that time because nobody had a clue what this was. And we did not write a proposal as far as I went. Give me 2 paragraphs of what you want to do and go do it. And so that's how it happened. And so I think for me, even beyond innovation, I think it takes vision and foresight to go to make those decisions. Coming back to this rapidly evolving context, I still see that is where grant making needs to go. That sometimes things are not that clear, but there's a sense of these are the capabilities that I think we need to be able to bring into the space to support communities. And so you need to be able to do that. So I think for me, beyond innovation, it just takes that vision and foresight, but also quick thinking and agility. And I think I mentioned agility yesterday many times. The second part, of course, is when you talk about collaborations and partnerships, I think we forget the community. And when I speak about data and data points, community is a data point, but also that's where we're trying to solve challenges, but also communities are the first responders. And so how do we then, based in a data and technology context, work with communities to co-design and co-create those solutions? Money is an enabler. And I think that's why when I see just funding the enabler, and I think Rachel and her team yesterday were very clear around us trying to fix them into boxes. What technology does is it's borderless. And the world is increasingly borderless. And I kept on telling my group yesterday, if Uber or Airbnb never rang a bell, then now we know what that is. And so if we can continue to sort of recognize that data and data points are just not data points, it's about people. And so how do we ensure that our systems recognize the place of people in the entire value chain of how we deliver impact to communities? Of course, you mentioned the notion of technology, and I come from the perspective of saying, listen, those are tools we need to understand. We do not necessarily have to be expert in it, but that's where I think collaboration and partnerships come in. And interesting enough that these companies get it. Some of us think they don't, but they do. And so part of my work over the last 20 years is trying to convince the big companies to begin to look at Africa not just as a place to sell products, but actually thinking through how we can leverage the technology, because a self-driving car in the US is a vanity project. But if I can get a drone in Africa to look at food and agriculture, that's a life project. It changes lives. And so we've been able to do that over time. And so we continue to push that. Satellites that were looking up and continue to look at stars and constellations and telling us whether we are here alone or not doesn't make sense. When you can turn that satellite down and 30 centimeters, I can able to tell you land cover, land use, crop, map communities. I mean, we were shocked 3 years ago that, for those of you who know Kenya, Narok kept on flooding. And a lot of you put in a lot of money on relief and tents and camps, especially the Red Cross. That looking at historical data, using a satellite that was just there, Narok has been built on a temporary reef. And so now we know, right? And I can tell you, many of your places, you build on places you should not be building, right? So, and basically that's how we see technology. And then being able then to bring that to philanthropy. Now, tell us, stop wasting your money. What you need to figure out is, now that you know Narok is a temporary river, how do you then rethink how you engage in terms of mobility, urbanization, a built environment, and so that you don't keep on spending money every 5 years. There's an El Nino. The same thing is in Nairobi, and I've looked at a lot of your cities. It is the same. And then finally, I think in terms of the context of data innovation and technology, is basically thinking through, and like Becky, previously we were big on giving computers to people. 2 years obsolete. We have a generation that has never touched a laptop. We will never touch a laptop because this is all they know. And so what we're figuring out right now is, how do you bring cloud computing, those capabilities that you don't necessarily have to invest in this infrastructure, that you can at least get spaces where you can access technology, even as community groups. And so what we've been able to do over time, and that's where we're seeing the impact, is that can you at least enable communities to have some level of fluency, then collaborate in terms of providing the big infrastructure that are not personalized so that they can live beyond individuals. But also then those are collaborative spaces where everybody else can bring in their resources so that those resources are shared. And I think the sharing economy is really something that philanthropy has given. So I think over time, that's what we've been able to do, and hopefully we can continue to do that with the APN. We're still talking about how are we able to aggregate philanthropy data. And this is something that I'm sure we're still struggling with. We still don't know your value in the economy. And even how can philanthropy then organize so that you are funding the value chain and not funding capacity, and then not funding some certain outcomes, not funding some certain inputs. And so we see gaps there. So potentially using data, and we've tried that with the APN, we're still pushing to do that, is simply thinking through how do we, or you have the technology that you can share your data, including location, where you invest over time, and so that you can be able to make a case to government, as you've mentioned, to policymakers, that this is the input of philanthropy, and this is why we need an X law for philanthropy, or this is how we need some tax incentives for philanthropy, or this is how we need you to treat philanthropy very differently. And so for us, what we're doing with the you always have a few that are afford settlement, but then how do you organize this? And so I think that there's potential, and data is one of those things that has been able to begin to bring that conversation onto the table.
Thank you so much. I think the one thing that last point that you made, Figo, about using data and technology in terms of building the evidence, because it is the evidence then that we use, whether it's engaging with communities, whether it's engaging with the funders, and also the whole conversation around impact management, impact measurement. So I think that point to me, in terms of the role of data and technology in terms of building the evidence for the sector, I think it's a very, very important point. And also as a tool to engage with policymakers, government in particular. And Lulu, I want to then come to you, actually to all of you, you and Prof, just around the issue of policymakers, government, picking on that point. But I think, and you as well, Pico, maybe just that would be the last point, just around policy and advocacy and where we've come from, where we're going. Because gone are the days when we used to wag our hands at government and tell them, this is what you need to fix, this is what is not working. We're now at a point where we're being told we need to collaborate with them. How do you collaborate with people who just read the rules and tell you this is where you need to go? So I wanted to come to you in terms of just that point around engaging with policymakers, but also where you feel we are, where we need to be going. Are we effectively engaging government as potential partners in this journey? And what needs to shift, both on our side and on the side of policymakers? Are there any policymakers in the room? Yes, one. That says something. But yeah.
Thank you. That's a very, very interesting question. I like that question from, and I can think about it and talk about it from so many angles, so many fronts. But it's really interesting because this morning at breakfast, I was talking to someone exactly about that. We had a whole conversation, and we talked about strategic engagement with policymakers, as opposed to pointing fingers and maybe looking at things in terms of change, looking at ourselves as change makers. What do you need to do to get to that change that you want to see? What is it that needs to happen? How? Who do you need to engage? How do you need to engage them? And maybe the strategies that you need to employ in order to achieve that. So one of the major, I think it's one of our 4 pillars within the LSF is creating a conducive environment in terms of policy, laws, systems, strategies, whatever it is, to ensure that we have a system that enables us to actually be able to achieve access to justice for all. So that requires a lot of engagement at the policy level, but very strategic engagement as well. And I think at some point we have to think about the outcome, the end. We have to have the end in mind. What is it that we are trying to achieve? But also think about how can you make what you're trying to say to the other person, the policymaker, a priority for them. I was saying this morning, like we tend to think in development, what is really important to me should be important to everyone. But you also have to remember that they have a million other priorities. So why should they focus on your priority? And why is it that what you're saying is important? So you have to almost sell the benefits to them, not just to you, but to them as well. If I do this, if you support this, if you facilitate this to happen, this is what it's going to do for you. This is what it's going to achieve. So we talk about national development, we talk about poverty reduction, we talk about things at this level, not at this level, because we're trying to bring about change. And it's not easy to do when you go and start saying, you know, people need this and people need that. They'll listen to you, you will go, and then they'll go like, well, we also need to build a road, you know. So you really have to set it in such a way that it is beneficial to all concerned. That's really important. I also wanted to give another example. I am the vice chair and founder of the Tanzania Startup Association, which is an organization that was set up in 2020. And when the organization was, and I always compare startup, innovation, technology with philanthropy. I compare the two. And the reason why I do that is I feel like we're always trying to achieve similar things in different ways. So when the organization was set up in 2020, started from scratch, did not exist, did not have, was not even understood. People did not even know what a startup is, what innovation is, you know, and things like that. And I remember we had 3 key focus areas that we wanted to address, which you might as well address in philanthropy as well. Number one, we wanted to do policy change. We wanted there to be a policy for startups in Tanzania. We wanted the government to recognize startup as an ecosystem and give it the prominence that we thought that it should have. That's number one. So we really had to do a lot of work in terms of engaging policymakers. Number two, we wanted to do upscaling to make sure that we build capacity of the ecosystem itself, but of everybody else to understand what is this thing that, you know, we're trying to bring about. And then number three, it was an investment. We wanted to bring about investment for startups in Tanzania. I was saying to somebody that I think it was, is it a 2021 report or some reports recently that said Tanzania is amongst the top 10 in terms of startup ecosystem. We are getting very close now to having a startup policy in Tanzania, ahead of some few countries. So the process wasn't easy. There was a lot of engagement, a lot of using personal networks, a lot of using collaboration, a lot of research that was done to make the case and to show why this is important, documentation of successes and achievements that have so far been made in terms of investment that has been brought in within the ecosystem and the sector. I always look at it and think, we could do this in philanthropy. We could do exactly the same thing. We could train people to understand exactly what philanthropy is about, change mindset in terms of how people see philanthropy. We could have laws and policy regulations and a system that recognizes philanthropy. We could also get somehow focus on making sure there is enough investment for the philanthropic sector as well. So so when you talk about policy and policy change and business in terms of that, it's more collaboration, more engagement, looking at best practices elsewhere, what has been done and has been done well, and how we can use good examples from places where they've been very successful. Because oftentimes when you talk to people and you say, you see, this has been done in a context similar to ours, they've been able to achieve this much by just doing 1, 2, 3. You get more, I I guess people listen to you more because they can relate. When you come in with something that looks alien to everybody else, then it's like, okay, but how is that going to happen? What is that going to look like? And why should we engage in that? And I think sometimes it's just a matter of pushing and not stopping.
So much. Pushing and not stopping. Becky. So I think one would expect that government would be running, in fact, embracing philanthropy because it fills in the gaps in many of the areas where it has failed in terms of providing social goods and services. Why do we still have this disconnect where we feel in some cases? So, first of all, what's been working? How can we engage? Are we engaging correctly, or are we engaging on the right issues? What needs to shift? So maybe engage just a little bit around the issue of policy and the role of advocacy in terms of engagement with government.
Hi. Okay, it's fine. It's back now. So let me answer your question by tying it back to the issues of innovations and collaborations, because I think we cannot expect to influence policy or even to engage government unless there's a framework of engagement and collaboration. And this requires, at least in my view, there are so many factors, but let me focus on one, and I want to draw in some of this stuff that Philip was also referring to. I think one, there's an element of risk-taking, and secondly, there's an element of just going in for a long haul, longevity. You can never influence policy in a short space of time. Neither are you able to develop proper relations with government. Remember, governments are made up of politicians who are kind of short-term focused, but policies are not short-term focused, and so you need to think about it. So when Philip mentions this idea of and I don't know if Rose is here, so because at times innovation is also a question of chance and an opportunity. So there was a time at Trust Africa then we were made to believe that we had excess money, about $2 million that we needed to spend, and till today I don't know whether we had that money or not, but we were made to believe that there's this money we need to spend. And so we decided, okay, what are we going to do? Let's do something that we have never done before. Let's just call a group of 10 institutions and just say to them, here is money, do whatever you have wanted to do. And that's what we did, and that's what Philip was referring. So, Brian was there, we brought him on board, and everyone, we brought these groups together, and there was one group that was represented by a journalist. And this journalist's intelligence just went overboard, and he said, what are you hiding? What is it that you're not telling us? Let me say that group did not really succeed because he didn't allow his mind and everything to actually innovate. But the groups that actually took the opportunity, they actually, are somewhere together. So if you look at some of them, some of you are very familiar with the illicit financial flows debate that Trust Africa and others have been leading. Alvin from Justice Network they were just beginning when they got that grant, which was just from chance. And look at where they are today with the debate on illicit financial flows and so forth and so on. Philip is an example. After that, the work that he did with government in terms of data revolution, open governance systems in Kenya, etc., is a result of taking that chance. But it has to happen over a long period of time. It doesn't happen overnight. But honestly speaking, all of us here, I'm now sitting in a position where I can look back and just do reflections and see what we have all done. A lot of groups are engaging with policymakers. a lot of groups are engaged with policymakers. To begin with, just yesterday having the first vice president open a meeting is an indication that government is looking. They are actually appreciating the research they are doing. Otherwise, they would not give you a minute to actually do that. Last year, APF had the whole day in Rwanda, where President Kagame and the First Lady spent the whole day there. The President spoke in the morning at the forum, and then the First Lady spoke in the evening. And they spent the whole day there, etc. I can mention all these things where this is happening. Various governments now have units that are dedicated to philanthropy. Go to Liberia, there's a secretariat on philanthropy. You go to South Africa, you go to Kenya. If Arif was going to be here, he was going to talk to you about the partnership that he has built over this long period of time and doing amazing investment in the different counties. We recently, as philanthropists, wrote the philanthropy strategy for the government of Rwanda. The government of Rwanda is a philanthropy strategy that was written by individuals from here, and they are trying to implement it. The African Union Foundation was established through the formation and processes of African philanthropy. SADC has a unit now that is dealing with the engagement of non-state actors, one of which is philanthropy. I can go on and on telling you what is happening in different countries, in different regions, about the realities on the ground where government is indeed now looking at philanthropies, at times for selfish reasons. Because the ODA that governments used to depend on has declined. And now the most available and readily available source is philanthropy. And so they will come to you. They will come to you and want to have a date with you, fall in love with you, but for different reasons, right? It's now up to you to decide whether you want to fall in love for the same reasons or for a different reason. So this is happening. That's the point I'm trying to make, that this is happening, but it requires us to really engage in a long-term, strategies, but also to be clear about the reasons why we are engaging with government. And I think we should really take the opportunity right now, because governments are waiting, but they are also beginning to see the value that philanthropy brings. So governments have to respond to their citizens, service delivery. But they cannot fully do so because of the limitations and shortages of resources. And they want philanthropy to meet that gap. In meeting that gap, I think that's where we can be very innovative and creative.
Fantastic. So that means the relationship is changing, things are happening. And it was wonderful to hear some of those examples. We are not where we were 10 years ago. So maybe just to wind up, I'd invite each of us just to make some parting remarks, a statement, perhaps a challenge, words of wisdom that you might want to leave with us. I'll start with you, Pico.
Thank you so much. I don't think I have words of wisdom. I think for me, it's, and you said it's a path to impact, right? I think it's a journey, and what we've seen, it takes a long time to invest in these spaces, but also I think it's about investing in people. I wanted to chime into the policy discussion. In my other hat, I am actually a policymaker. And so the first thing I would say is that just be true to yourselves, because honestly, sometimes, and I'm being very honest, philanthropy is not homogeneous. Some of you come and the things that you say, I get shocked from what I hear you say in those close rooms, and then to what I hear you say outside there. You change faces. So can we just be consistent, because then those issues are the ones that cloud philanthropy. But I think, I'll be very honest from an insider perspective, is that you provide agility, right? And that's what governments need right now. Though the other things take too long, you are there and you can provide agility. The second thing I think that you can do, basically, and we are doing this a lot, I think, with the plans of all of these guys, is that you're the ones who can bring in civil society in the room. You're the ones who can bring in other voices so that at least policymakers have that viewpoint, because you have power. unlike your recipients, you have money, and money is an interesting equalizer in these spaces. So I feel there's potentially an added responsibility to philanthropy to amplify voices of the communities that you serve. So, I mean, that's something that I really hope that you can continue to do, especially in the spaces that we have. Third piece is that you sort of think, sometimes you come to government or policymakers and you intimidate the hell out of my colleagues. Because you have capacity, you have experience, you have networks, you get into these meetings. These guys they're busy, they're linear. And so how you engage, and those are the tactics to engage. Don't come from a position of I know. Come up from a position of can we co-create and collaborate so that it opens up these possibilities. I think for me that's my parting shot. But understand the power that you have. And sometimes you think policymakers have power, they may not necessarily have it because of the pressures they have. And so there's an opportunity to sort of engage in a very different way beyond the other bilaterals with conditions and pressures that they have. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. I think the challenge here is next year we need a workshop, a breakout just on that. I feel like. But Lulu, any parting remarks as we wind up? I think we've got now 2 minutes. Yeah.
1 minute. I'll say it in 1 minute. I think everything has been said. I believe that we have to be visionary. We have to think long term. We have to be strategic about what we want to achieve. It is possible. It can be achieved. We have examples of things that we've done in the past that have been extremely successful. I remember when we started doing access to justice legal aid within the LSF about 12 years ago. We had paralegals who were not recognized at all. The sector was not recognized at all as well. And then we thought we really need to focus to ensure, push and focus to ensure that we have a policy, a law that actually recognizes. So we advocated for that in 2017. A law was enacted, the Legal Aid Act of Tanzania of 2017, and the Legal Aid Policy of Zanzibar 2018. But then within the law and the policy, the recognition of the paralegals came in terms of accreditation, registration, and all of this. And now it's a cadre that is known, is accepted. I remember back in those days, they used to call them push. They don't do that anymore because it is accepted. So I believe in having a vision and really pushing, being passionate about it, and it's about the long haul, the longevity, because policy change does not happen overnight.
Muzee, and I did that deliberately. We will finally hear Muzee, wisdom. This is where all the wisdom ends and begins. Okay.
So I want to end by actually saying, for me, the philanthropy sector is really dynamic. It's really dynamic. I mean, there are so many actors, so many processes, and we probably will struggle to even make sense of what's going on. We recently just edited the Alliance June issue on new vehicles on philanthropy. And Jackie and I had to be in a panel where we wanted to showcase that what is touted as new is actually something that we have been practicing here in the continent for years and years. But it's now coming as new. And so we really are dynamic, and part of it is also shown by the interest that we are getting. And so I want to end by advertising, basically. We were a center that offers various training, education, and there's a huge interest from the sector around doing PhDs. And so I wanted to just end by saying, those of you that really want to come and do this kind of work, either through studying, training, fellowships, we are really there to assist and work with you wherever we can, because data and knowledge creation is very, very important. If we don't have knowledge or data, it's very impossible for us to argue for the impact. So part of dynamizing the philanthropic sector is actually creating knowledge, creating data sets that we are able to use to analyze situations, but also to make a sense around the way forward. So I've got my colleagues here, Jacob and Tandy. Those of you that want to register, please see them. They are somewhere around. If they can wave, there they are. Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity.
Please give them a round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you, Becky. Thank you, Lulu. Thank you, Pico. No, I didn't forget. I didn't forget this time. But please, let's give them one last round of applause, please. And also give yourself a round of applause. You've been a great audience. Thank you very much.